There is a moment, and if you are here, if you are listening to these words with your whole chest instead of just your ears, you already know the moment I mean. There is a moment when the person who broke you finally stops being a villain in your story and becomes something far stranger, a teacher. Not a kind one, not a gentle one, but a teacher nonetheless. And in that moment, something inside you that has been asleep for years, maybe decades, maybe your entire life, opens one eye and looks around and says, "Oh, oh, I see now. I see what this was for." That is where we begin tonight. Not with comfort, not with a warm blanket of reassurance that everything happens for a reason, because I will not insult your suffering with a bumper sticker. We begin instead in the dark, honest place where the empath, the one who gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left to give, finally lifts their head from the wreckage and asks the only question that matters. What was I actually doing here? I want to speak to you today about the meeting of two souls, one who had learned, long before you ever crossed their path, to survive by consuming the light of others, and one who had learned, long before that, to survive by pouring their light into anyone who reached for it. These are not opposites, though the world likes to paint them that way. Hero and villain, victim and predator, saint and devil. No, these are two halves of a single wound, walking around in two different bodies, and when they meet, and they always meet, they are drawn to each other the way water finds the lowest ground. Something ancient begins to move. You did not fall in love with a monster by accident. I need you to sit with that sentence, uncomfortable as it is, because there is no growth without discomfort, no gold without fire, no dawn without the long humiliation of the night. You did not stumble blindly into that relationship, that friendship, that family dynamic, that workplace, as an innocent lamb wandering into a wolf's den. Something in you recognized something in them, not their cruelty, never their cruelty, but their hunger. Because you too have been hungry. You have simply starved yourself in a more socially acceptable way. You called it selflessness. You called it love. You called it being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who never gives up on people. And they called their hunger confidence, called it charisma, called it simply knowing what I want and taking it. Two hungers, dressed in different clothing, sitting down at the same table. This is not an accusation. Hear me clearly. This is not me telling you that you deserved what happened to you, that you invited your own destruction, that you are somehow equally responsible for the wounds another person inflicted with cold and calculating hands. No, what I am telling you is older and stranger and, I promise you, far more liberating than blame. I am telling you that the outer drama you lived through was a picture, a crude, painful, unmistakable picture of an inner drama that had been running inside you since before you could speak. Let us talk for a moment about mirrors. Every person who wounds us deeply is, whether we like it or not, a mirror, not a mirror of who we are in totality. That would be too simple, too flattering a theory for the depth of pain involved. No, they are a mirror of the part of us we have refused to look at, the part we exiled, the part we locked in the basement of ourselves and told, "You are not welcome here. You are too much. You are dangerous. You must never, ever come out." The narcissist you loved, the narcissist who used you, drained you, discarded you and returned and discarded you again. That person is walking around fully identified with the very hunger, the very entitlement, the very ruthless self-interest that you buried in yourself so long ago. You forgot it was ever there. You buried your anger. You buried your right to take up space. You buried the simple animal truth that your needs matter as much as anyone else's. You buried it because somewhere, at some point, in some room you may not even remember, you learned that wanting things loudly was dangerous, that having needs made you a burden, that the safest way to be loved was to become endlessly, tirelessly useful. And so you built a beautiful, aching monument to selflessness. You became the empath, the healer, the one who could read a room before she entered it, who could sense a storm behind someone's eyes before they knew it was coming, who could hold the pain of everyone around her because, and this is the secret nobody tells you, holding other people's pain was easier, so much easier, than sitting alone with your own. The narcissist did not create your wound. I want to say that again, more slowly, because it matters more than almost anything else. I will say tonight, the narcissist did not create your wound. They found it. They found it the way water finds a crack in stone. Not through malice exactly, though it may have felt like malice, but through instinct. Their whole nervous system is trained, has been trained since their own childhood wound was formed, to locate the person in the room who will give without asking for equal return. They did not choose you by accident. They chose you the way a plant turns toward light. You were their light, and you let yourself be consumed because some ancient, exhausted part of you believed that being consumed was the price of being loved at all. Now, here is where the teaching begins. Here is where the wound becomes the doorway, because for a long time you thought the story was simple. You thought, "I am good, they are bad. I gave, they took. I loved, they used." And there is truth in that, real truth. Truth I will not take from you, because the harm was real, and your pain was real, and no amount of spiritual language should ever be used to erase the reality of what was done to you. But if you stop there, if you stay forever in the simple story of victim and villain, you will heal the wound only partway. You will walk away from that relationship with your body intact, but your soul still split in two, still living in exile from itself, still waiting for the next hungry mirror to walk through the door and show you once again the parts of yourself you have not yet reclaimed. This is the terrifying and magnificent truth. The relationship was not a punishment. It was an initiation, a brutal one, an unfair one that should never have cost you what it cost you, but an initiation nonetheless. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, will show you the shape of your own disowned power faster than watching someone else wield, without apology, without hesitation, without a single moment of guilt, the very things you were taught to be ashamed of. Watch them closely in your memory, without flinching this time. Watch how they said no without explaining themselves. Watch how they walked away from situations that no longer served them without a backward glance, without months of agonizing over other people's feelings. Watch how they took up space in a room, spoke their opinion as though it was simply fact, never once shrank themselves to make someone else comfortable. It disgusted you. It also, if you are honest, and I am asking you tonight to be more honest than you have ever been, it also fascinated you. Some small, starved part of you watched them move through the world unapologetically and thought, what would that feel like? To take instead of only give? To matter to myself the way I matter to everyone else? That fascination was not weakness. That fascination was your own buried self, banging on the door of the basement, begging to be let out. I know this is difficult to hear. I know that right now, some of you are recoiling from these words because it feels, in this moment, like I am defending the person who hurt you. I am not. Let me be unambiguous, because clarity is a form of love. What they did to you was wrong. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the cycles of affection and cruelty, the way they made you question your own memory, your own perception, your own worth, all of it was wrong, and none of it was your fault, and none of it was secretly a gift wrapped in cruel packaging, sent to you by a benevolent universe with impeccable timing. Suffering is not proof of destiny. Pain is not automatically meaningful simply because it hurt enough to leave a mark. But, and here is the turn, here is the place where the wound becomes wisdom instead of simply scar tissue. Meaning is not something that arrives, gift wrapped, from outside of us. Meaning is something we make afterward in the workshop of our own reflection, out of the raw material of what happened. The event does not have to be good for the meaning we forge from it to be good. A forest fire is not good, but what grows from the ash can be extraordinary. This is not optimism. This is chemistry. This is how transformation has always worked. In every tradition that has ever taken the human soul seriously, through descent, through burning, through the unbearable pressure that turns coal into something that can catch the light. So let us speak now of what the empath must reclaim. You must reclaim your anger, not as a weapon to wound others the way you were wounded. That is not reclamation. That is merely passing the wound along, and the wound does not deserve to travel any further than it already has. But you must reclaim anger as information. Anger is not the opposite of love. Anger is the guardian at the gate of your own worth. For years you let people walk through that gate unchallenged, because you had convinced yourself that a good person, a spiritual person, an empathetic person does not get angry. And so your anger, unable to leave through the front door, began leaking out the back, as exhaustion, as chronic guilt, as a body that ached in places doctors could not explain, as a low hum of resentment underneath every act of generosity you performed. Your anger was never gone. It was only unlicensed. It is time to give it its papers. You must reclaim your boundaries, not as walls. Walls keep everyone out indiscriminately, the harmful and the harmless alike, and a life spent behind walls is not healing. It is simply a different kind of prison. Reclaim boundaries instead as a living membrane, the way your own skin works, permeable enough to let nourishment in, firm enough to keep poison out. For most of your life, you may have believed that having boundaries made you unkind. I am telling you tonight, with everything in me, that the opposite is true. A person without boundaries is not more loving. They are simply more available for consumption. Real love, love that costs something and means something, can only exist between two people who are each, individually, whole. You cannot pour from an empty vessel and call it generosity. You can only call it slow disappearance. You must reclaim your own desire. This may be the hardest one of all, because somewhere along the way you learn to ask, what does this person need from me, before you ever learned to ask, what do I actually want? You became so fluent in the emotional weather of everyone around you that you lost the language of your own internal climate. I am asking you tonight to relearn that language, not loudly, not all at once, not by swinging to the other extreme and becoming someone who takes without regard for others. That is not the goal, and it never was. The goal is wholeness. The goal is a self that can give generously because it is full, not desperately, because it is trying to earn its own right to exist. Here is something I have come to believe after watching this pattern play out in soul after soul, story after story, century after century. Though the costumes change, and the technology changes, and the language changes, every one of us carries an entire cast of characters inside us that we have never met. We meet them only when we meet other people who are living those characters out loud in the world with a freedom we ourselves have never allowed. This is why the narcissist felt at first so magnetic, not because they were kind. Kindness rarely produces obsession. Kindness produces peace, and peace, sadly, does not announce itself with fireworks. They felt magnetic because they were living without shame the exact qualities you had spent your whole life suppressing in the name of being good. Confidence without apology, desire without guilt, the audacity to simply want and to say so and to move toward what they wanted without first taking a survey of everyone else's feelings about it. You were not attracted to their cruelty. Do not let anyone tell you that, and do not tell it to yourself in the cruel privacy of your own late night thoughts. You were attracted to their freedom. It simply turned out, tragically, that in this particular person, that freedom had curdled into entitlement, into an inability to see other people as fully real, into a hunger with no bottom. But the freedom itself, the capacity to take up space, to want without shame, to walk through the world as though you belong in it, that freedom is not theirs alone. It was never theirs alone. It is a birthright you share with every human being who has ever drawn breath, including you, especially you. Let me tell you what happens, then, when the empath finally understands this. Let me tell you what happens after the grief, after the disbelief, after the long nights of replaying every conversation looking for the moment you should have seen it coming, after the anger at yourself for staying, after the anger at them for making staying feel like the only option, after all of that finally, slowly, begins to settle like sediment at the bottom of a river that has, at long last, stopped raging. What happens is this: you stop looking for them. You stop scanning every new room, every new relationship, every new friendship for the presence of another hungry mirror to complete you by consuming you. And in the silence that follows, a silence that at first feels unbearably empty, because you have spent so long defining yourself through what others needed from you. In that silence, something begins to happen that can only be described as a homecoming. You begin to meet yourself, not the performed self, not the self who exists to be useful, not the self who learned that love is something you earn through endless emotional labor. You begin to meet the self who was there all along, underneath all of it, waiting with what I can only call an extraordinary patience. That self does not need you to be perfect. That self does not need you to save anyone. That self simply needs to be witnessed, finally, by the very person who abandoned it first. You. This is the real ending of the story, not revenge, not the narcissist's downfall, though sometimes life arranges that too, in its own indifferent timing. Not a triumphant return to the relationship transformed and healed, because some wounds, some people are not meant to be returned to. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and closing them is not failure, it is wisdom. The real ending is this: you come home to yourself. You stop outsourcing your worth to anyone who is willing to take it. You become, for the first time perhaps in your entire life, the author of your own story instead of a supporting character in someone else's hunger. I want to say something now about forgiveness, because I know it is hovering in the room. That word, heavy and loaded and often misused. Forgiveness does not mean what you have been told it means. It does not mean pretending the harm did not happen. It does not mean reopening a door that should stay shut. It does not mean excusing behavior that was in fact inexcusable. Forgiveness, properly understood, is not something you do for the other person at all. It is something you do for the part of yourself that is still, even now, chained to the past by the sheer weight of unresolved rage. To forgive is not to say what you did was acceptable. To forgive is to say, I will no longer let what you did be the organizing principle of my life. It is to take back the enormous, exhausting labor of hatred and redirect that same energy into something that actually belongs to you, your own becoming. Hatred, held long enough, does not punish the person who hurt you. They have likely moved on, found someone new to feed from, given the whole episode barely a second thought. Hatred, held long enough, only punishes the one holding it. It becomes another basement, another exile, another part of yourself you must one day, painfully, reclaim. This does not mean the timeline is quick. It does not mean you should rush towards forgiveness before your grief has finished speaking. Grief has its own intelligence, its own pace, and to override it in the name of spiritual bypassing is simply another form of self-abandonment dressed up in enlightened language. Feel the rage fully first. Let it move through you like weather, because rage that is honored eventually exhausts itself, while rage that is suppressed only calcifies, hardens, becomes a permanent resident instead of a passing storm. There is an old idea, older than any single thinker, found in every tradition that has looked honestly at the human condition that says, what we do not make conscious, we are doomed to live out as fate. I want you to hear that as a promise, not a threat, because it means the reverse is equally true. What we do make conscious, we are no longer doomed to repeat. This is why you are here, not by accident, not because you enjoy suffering, and please, release yourself from that particular cruelty tonight. You do not love pain, you simply loved so hard, so completely, that you mistook the size of your devotion for the size of your worth. You are here because some deep architecture inside you is finally ready to look at what happened and ask not, why did this happen to me? But what does this show me about the parts of myself I have not yet met? That question is the doorway. Everyone who has ever walked through it emerges different, not unscathed. Nobody emerges unscathed from real transformation, and anyone who tells you healing is painless is selling you something, but different, sturdier, less breakable, because they are no longer built entirely out of other people's approval, more discerning, because they have learned, at great cost, to tell the difference between a person who wants to know them and a person who merely wants to use them. Softer, too, in the places that matter, because reclaiming your own power does not require becoming hard, it only requires becoming whole. I want to speak now to the part of you that is afraid. This means becoming someone you do not recognize. I want to speak to the fear that reclaiming your boundaries, your anger, your desire will somehow turn you into the very thing that hurt you. This fear is common, and it is understandable, and it is also, I promise you, unfounded. There is a profound difference between someone who has integrated their power and someone who is possessed by it. The narcissist you knew was possessed, taken over entirely by one part of the self, with no counterbalance, no capacity for real empathy, no ability to see another person as anything other than a resource or an obstacle. That is not strength. That is imbalance dressed up as confidence. True strength, the kind I am inviting you toward tonight, holds power and compassion together in the same hand at the same time. It says no without cruelty. It takes up space without erasing others. It wants things and pursues them while still remaining capable of genuine love, genuine curiosity about other people's inner lives, genuine tenderness. You will not become them by reclaiming what they mirrored in you. You will simply become fully, finally, yourself, a self who was always capable of both giving and receiving, both softness and strength, both love and self-respect, but who had, for reasons that made sense at the time, learned to live on only one side of that ledger. Let me tell you a little about the shape of this journey, because I do not want to leave you with only philosophy. I want to leave you with something like a map, even if every map of the soul is in the end only a rough sketch of a country too vast to fully chart. First comes the shattering, the betrayal, the discard, the moment the mask finally slips, and you see with sickening clarity what was actually happening beneath all the charm and promise. This stage is not gentle. It is not meant to be gentle. It is meant to break something in you, not you yourself, but the illusion you had built, the story you were telling yourself about who this person was and who you needed to be in order to keep them. Then comes the grief, and do not rush this stage. Do not let anyone, including the harsher voice in your own head, shame you for how long it takes. Grieve the relationship you thought you had. Grieve the future you imagined. Grieve too, and this is the part most people skip, the version of yourself who believed that being endlessly understanding was a virtue without cost. That version of you served you once. She got you through childhoods and situations that demanded exactly that kind of adaptability. She is not your enemy, but she is tired, and she has earned her rest. Then comes the anger, finally allowed to speak after years of silence. Let it. It will not destroy you. It will, if you let it move rather than fester, clear the ground for what comes next. Then and only then comes the reckoning, the long, unglamorous work of asking what in you was so willing to disappear for the sake of being chosen. This is not comfortable work. It will ask you to look at old wounds, old patterns, old rooms you thought you had left behind. It will ask you to be honest about the ways you abandoned yourself long before anyone else ever did. And finally, slowly, unevenly, comes the integration, the reclaiming of everything you exiled, your anger, your boundaries, your desire, your right to take up space in your own life. This stage does not arrive all at once like a light switching on. It arrives the way dawn arrives. Gradually then, one day, you notice that it is simply light now, and you cannot quite say when the darkness ended. I want to close tonight by saying something that may sound strange after everything I have told you. Thank them. Not out loud, necessarily. Not by reaching out, not by reopening any door that needs to stay closed, but somewhere private, somewhere only you will ever know about. Thank the very person who hurt you, not for the harm, never for the harm, but for the mirror, because without that mirror, you might have spent the rest of your life giving yourself away in smaller, quieter, less dramatic ways, never quite understanding why you always felt so depleted, why love always seemed to cost you your entire self. It took someone taking everything for you to finally notice how much you had been giving away all along, to everyone, your entire life, simply for the privilege of being tolerated. That is not a small gift, even though it arrived in the cruelest possible packaging. That is the beginning of your entire life, actually beginning, not the life you perform for others, not the life built around being needed, the life that is actually, finally, unmistakably yours. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were simply asleep in a part of yourself that this experience, however brutal, however unfair, however much you did not deserve it, has now woken up. And a person who is awake cannot be consumed the way a person who is sleeping can be. A person who knows their own worth does not need it reflected back to them by someone else's hunger. A person who has met their own shadow, faced it, and welcomed it home is no longer at the mercy of anyone who tries to use that shadow against them, because there is nothing left to use. It has already been claimed. It already belongs to you. So take this wound and let it be the beginning, not the ending. Take this heartbreak and let it be the door, not the wall. Somewhere inside you, right now, tonight, there is a version of yourself who no longer needs to earn love through disappearance, who can say no without spiraling into guilt, who can want things loudly and pursue them without apology, who can give beautifully, generously, from a place of fullness rather than fear, because she finally belongs to herself first. That is who you are becoming. That is who you always were, underneath the performance, underneath the fear, underneath every version of yourself you built to survive rooms that were never safe enough to let you be whole. Go and meet her. She has been waiting for you this entire time, and she is not angry that it took so long. She only asks that you do not leave her waiting any longer. Thank you.